The summer Dudley Dursley turned 11, the gang came every day. Harry knew their footsteps before he could see them from the upstairs window. Piers's quick shuffle, the heavier plod of Dennis and Gordon, Malcolm at the back. He had the afternoon mapped by now, down the back stairs, through the kitchen, out the garden gate before they came around the side of the house, then the fence, and how long he could keep it between himself and Dudley. Some days he lost them on Magnolia Road before they organized themselves. Today he went left when he should have gone right, and Piers had his wrists before he'd taken 3 steps. Piers always got the wrists. He held them behind Harry's back with the practiced ease of long repetition, and Harry went still, because resistance was what Dudley wanted, and stillness sometimes made them bored. Not today. Dudley's fist caught him in the nose, and something cracked. Harry had been hit in the face many times before, which was why his glasses sat on their bridge, held together with tape, the frame repaired, until it was less spectacles than splint. He was used to the flash behind the eyes, the blood that came or didn't. But this time, he heard the crack and felt the wrong give. And by the time Piers let him go, one lens was in the grass and the other was split through in the frame, and above his left eye the skin had opened. They always left when they were finished. Harry sat in the grass and waited for the ringing to slow. He pressed his sleeve to the cut above his eye. Through the cracked right lens, he could see the back fence, the garden wall, the neighbors washing on the line. He sat there for a while, because there was never any urgency to going back inside. Petunia was cutting bread when Harry came through the back door. He had his hand pressed to his eye. He was not crying. He almost never cried, which was something she'd noticed without allowing herself to notice, but there was blood on Dudley's old green shirt, and on the cuff where he'd used his sleeve, and where his hand didn't cover his face. The skin above his brow was already beginning to swell. His glasses were finished. She could see that from the counter. She stood with the bread knife and thought very quickly. The Henderson window was open. She could hear their radio from here, which meant Mrs. Henderson could hear anything happening in this garden, and Mrs. Henderson had eyes like a magpie and a telephone she used with enthusiasm. The wound above Harry's eye would not close on its own. The glasses were beyond tape. If she kept him home, if she waited, if she held it closed and hoped, the net curtain in number 9 moved. Harry stood in the kitchen doorway, patient in the way of someone who had learned not to expect much in any direction. The blood on his collar was soaking in. Petunia put down the bread knife. "Get in the car," she said. "We are going, and when we get there, you are not to say anything except what I tell you to say. Do you understand?" Harry said he understood. The A&E was a long drive through Saturday afternoon traffic, and Petunia used all of it. "You were on your bicycle," she said to the windscreen. "On the drive. You went over a stone and came off, and the handlebar caught your face." She adjusted the stone once and settled. "That is what happened. You are not to add to it, and you are not to contradict it." Harry sat in the back with his sleeve to his eye and listened. He had always been good at this, the particular patience of staying still while a version of events was assembled around him and made ready for use. He listened to the angle she found for the fall, the way she placed the stone and worked it into the story until it fitted. He watched the back of her head. The hospital was bright with the particular light of a place that did not observe the difference between day and night. Fluorescent, total, coming from long strips overhead. The waiting room smelled of cleaning fluid and something tired underneath it. There were rows of plastic chairs, and a number of people Harry did not look at closely. He had never been inside a hospital. He had imagined it more frightening, or more obviously built for something grave. The light simply illuminated everything equally, without any apparent concern for what you came in carrying. He sat beside Petunia and waited. The doctor was a man in his 40s, with a careful, unhurried manner. He examined the cut, pressed the bone around the eye socket, asked questions that Petunia answered, and then mentioned X-rays standard, he said, for this kind of impact. Petunia said yes. She signed something at the desk. While she was signing, the doctor looked at Harry, not around him or past him, but at him, directly, in the sustained way of someone trained to look. Harry watched him looking, and didn't look away. The doctor's attention moved from the fresh cut to the bridge of Harry's nose, the older geography there, the healed-over record of prior repairs, and he said gently that they would get a picture taken and that Harry was doing very well. Harry said thank you. The X-ray room was cold and very quiet. Harry held still and didn't breathe when the radiographer told him to. The machine moved and made its sound. He thought about what it was. Seeing the inside of him, the white structures he'd once seen in a library book. That a machine could look through the surface of a person and find what held them together, without pain, without ceremony. In 2 minutes of held breath, seemed like something that should require more than it did. He breathed out when she told him to. The doctor reviewed the X-rays and gave them the results. No fracture, the bone clear, the cut manageable. If properly dressed, he gave Harry a kit. He gave Petunia the discharge letter, folded in thirds. Then he turned back to his screen and finished his notes. Harry watched the pen move. He couldn't make out the words from where he sat, but he could see that the pen moved steadily, paused, moved again. Something was being put down. The doctor wrote the presenting injury. He wrote the X-ray findings. And in the careful language designed for files, built to describe without accusing, to observe without concluding, he noted the old healed changes at the nasal structures consistent with prior blunt trauma, Harry's weight and build at the lower percentile for his age, the date and time and reference number now assigned and entered and kept. He did not say any of this aloud. He capped his pen and gave them a nod, and they were finished. The drive home was faster. Traffic had cleared. Petunia drove with both hands on the wheel and said nothing. She had managed it. She'd gone in, given them a clean account, come out. The Hendersons hadn't seen anything except Petunia getting into her car on a Saturday afternoon. She had made the right call and executed it correctly. She kept both hands on the wheel and did not think about the doctor's pen. Harry sat in the back with the plaster above his eye and his ruined glasses on his nose. One surviving sliver of lens gave him a narrow angle on the passing road, street signs coming clear and blurring as he moved his head, sharpening when he found the right position. He watched them pass. He thought about the X-ray machine, sideways, the way he thought about things he couldn't approach directly. The machine had looked through him. It had taken a picture of the inside of his skull, and a man in a room had looked at the picture and picked up a pen. He had been looked at before, by teachers, by neighbors, by Dudley's friends deciding whether to bother. He knew what it was to be looked over and found uninteresting. But the machine had not looked over him. It had looked through him to the thing underneath, and someone had written it down. He tried to understand what it meant to be the kind of person a file had been opened on. He was 10 years old. The plaster above his eye pulled when he moved. They were nearly home. He watched the last road signs pass and couldn't quite get hold of the thought, and then they were home and the day was over. She didn't sleep well the first night or the second. She did not make a point of this. She made a point of very little that Vernon might overhear and question. but she lay in the dark and calculated. The doctor had not called. There had been no follow-up, no letter, no knock at the door. She had done the controlled thing, the right thing, and the hospital had processed them through and sent them home with a kit and a letter on NHS stationery, and that had been the extent of it. She had given a clean account. She had signed her name. But a file existed now. She had read enough in the women's magazines over the years, bought for the recipes she told herself, and the reader letters, not the problem pages, about hospital records and what happened when records were examined. She had absorbed over many Tuesday afternoons with a cup of tea the particular lesson that a file was not nothing. A file had a number and a date and a reference, and it sat in a system and it waited. The system did not forget. She told herself it was a simple injury record. A child fell from a bicycle. These things happened every day. She got up at 6 and made breakfast and did not believe it. Without his glasses, the kitchen was light and approximate shapes. Harry had learned to eat by proximity in the days since the hospital, the bowl here, the spoon here, the glass of water here, and to work by feel when his hands were close enough to manage it. He was careful not to knock anything over. Knocked over glasses at breakfast had consequences. He sat at the table in Dudley's old green shirt, which was several sizes too large for him, and hung from his thin shoulders with no particular illusion of a body underneath. He was small for his age. He had always been small for his age in the way that stops being surprising when it has been true for long enough, and becomes simply part of how things are. Vernon ate his breakfast without looking at Harry. This was not unusual. Vernon had a particular way of not looking at Harry, the specific method of a man who has decided that a thing does not exist and maintains this position through deliberate and ongoing effort. The plaster above Harry's eye had been there for 4 days now. Vernon had not commented on it. He would not comment on it. To acknowledge the plaster would be to acknowledge what had produced it, and Vernon had apparently decided some years ago to interrupt that chain at the very first link and hold it there by force of will. Petunia set a cup of tea at Vernon's place. She did not set one at Harry's. She stood at the kitchen counter and watched the garden through the window and thought about a file with Harry's name on it, sitting in a system she had no access to. It was a Tuesday morning when the post arrived. Harry heard the letterbox before he could see anything, the clatter of it, the soft fall on the mat. He heard Dudley thundering down the stairs because Dudley always came thundering down for the post in case something had arrived for him, and then he heard Dudley stop. "Dad," Dudley said. There was something in his voice, a quality Harry had learned to read, that meant something interesting had happened, and Dudley had not yet decided what to do with it. Vernon lowered his newspaper. Harry could not read the envelope from where he sat. Without his glasses, the far counter was shapes and colors, no more. But he could see Vernon take the envelope and look at it, and he could see what the looking did to Vernon's face. "Who?" Vernon said, in the low, careful voice of a man keeping something from getting out. "Is writing to this boy?" No one answered. There was no answer to give. Vernon read the envelope again. He brought it to the counter, held it over the open bin, and then, after a moment that had some quality Harry could not name, tore it twice, and let the pieces fall. He sat back down. He picked up his newspaper. The newspaper blocked his face. Harry looked at the place on the counter where the letter had been. He hadn't been able to read it. He had heard his name when Dudley read the front of the envelope aloud, his name and something about a cupboard, which he hadn't caught clearly because Vernon had spoken over it. And then the letter had been torn and binned. That was the end of it. He did not ask any questions. He ate his cereal. Petunia had seen the envelope before Vernon took it. She had caught the writing on the front, the green ink, the particular address, and she had felt something shift under her, not quite physical, more like a recalibration. She had known at some level, she kept very carefully below the level of thought, that they would have an interest in Harry. She did not think about Lily directly if she could manage it, and she had been managing it for nearly 11 years. But she had not forgotten the letter she'd once written to a school on the other side of a door she'd been shut out of, nor the polite reply that had declined her, nor the fact that something over there had known her address then and had found it again 11 years later to leave an infant on her step. They had always known where Harry was. She understood that. But the envelope had said, "The cupboard under the stairs." And that was not simply knowing where Harry was. That was knowing exactly where Harry was, in the specific, interior sense. Someone over there had looked, carefully enough to know which room. Someone had written it down. She stood at the counter and held two things at once, which was something she had become very good at over the years. There was the envelope. The Wizarding World had a file on Harry. It knew his address with the precision of a person who sleeps in a cupboard rather than a bedroom. And there was the discharge letter in the kitchen drawer. The Muggle world had a file on Harry. It knew his weight and the old-healed state of his nose and the date of a Saturday afternoon in August. Both files existed. Both systems persisted. She could not get into either one. She could not alter either one. She could not explain either one to Vernon, because Vernon did not know about the first, and would respond to any attempt to explain it with a purple face and very loud decisions. She absorbed both files in silence and turned back to the washing up. Vernon finished his breakfast and left for work. Dudley ate a second bowl of cereal. Harry scraped the last of his own cereal carefully from the bowl by feel, rinsed the bowl at the sink, and went back to the cupboard. That night, he lay in the dark and thought about his name on an envelope. He did this in a circle, the way he thought about things that seemed important but had nowhere to go, carefully, without conclusion. His name on an envelope was not itself surprising. People wrote his name on things, school registers, the dentist's reminder cards. But the address, the cupboard under the stairs. Someone had written the cupboard under the stairs, which meant someone knew he slept there, which meant someone had looked at him carefully enough from wherever they were looking from to know that. He was used to not being noticed. He had spent 10 years being approximately invisible in a house full of people, with a talent for not seeing him when they preferred not to. The hospital had been different. The doctor had looked at him directly, without looking away, and now this letter had come from somewhere, addressed to his particular sleeping place. Two different someones in the same week had apparently noticed where Harry Potter was. He was 10 years old, and he didn't know what to do with this, so he didn't do anything. He lay in the dark and listened to the pipes in the wall and the sound of the Dursleys moving about upstairs, and eventually the house went quiet, and eventually he slept. In the morning, the newspaper was on the breakfast table, and the pieces of the letter were still in the bin. He ate his cereal carefully, by feel and proximity, and said nothing, which was what he was good at, and what he had always been good at, and what he was beginning to understand, without quite having words for it. Arabella Figg had been watching the street for 10 years, and she was very good at it, not in the obvious way. She was not a woman who stood at her window with binoculars, and she did not discuss what she saw with the neighbors, who were pleasant enough but had no reason to know what she was watching for. She watched the way she did most things, quietly, from angles, with the particular attentiveness of someone given a specific task who takes it seriously. The task was Harry Potter. It had been Harry Potter for 10 years, which was long enough to learn the patterns of the house at number 4, and to notice when the patterns changed. The pattern that changed was a Tuesday afternoon in August. She had been in her front garden with a watering can when Petunia Dursley's car came back up the street. This was not unusual. Petunia drove on errands most afternoons. What was unusual was Harry in the back seat. Harry was not taken on errands. He was left behind, with Arabella in the early years when they'd still made use of her, or simply at home, which was what had been happening this summer. The summer Dudley's gang came every day, and Harry spent his time outdoors in the way of a child, with nowhere indoors to go. She did not stare. She watered her marigolds. Petunia came around and opened the back door, and Harry got out. He was moving with care, the way you moved when something hurt. He had a plaster above his left eye, the kind from a hospital, not from a home first aid kit. She knew the difference. His glasses were wrong, the frame twisted, only one lens still seated in it. He was wearing Dudley's old green shirt, and there was something on the collar that had been washed out, but not fully out. So, Petunia had decided it was bad enough for a hospital. Arabella set down her watering can and considered whether to say anything. She and Petunia had a relationship of long and mutual standing. Arabella knew considerably more about the Dursleys than they knew she knew, and Petunia used her when she needed Harry-minded and resented her the rest of the time. It was not a warm arrangement. It was not designed to be. Petunia, who had turned to go back inside, stopped at the garden gate. She stood there a moment with her back to the street, not moving. She looked at the house and then very briefly toward Arabella, not at her precisely, but in her direction, the way a person looks when they are thinking about speaking, and have not decided. Arabella waited. The gate clicked. Arabella finished her watering. She went indoors, sat at her kitchen table with a cat on either side of her feet, and wrote a letter. She was brief. She had found, over the years, that Dumbledore did not need much from her. What she had seen, when she had seen it, from what angle? Harry came back from somewhere in Petunia's car on a Tuesday afternoon. He had a hospital plaster above his eye, and a wrongly bent glasses frame and something dark, washed but not out, on his collar. The car had not gone toward the chemist, which was 3 streets in the other direction. It had gone further, and come back with Harry. Her instinct said hospital. Her instinct had been reliable for 10 years. She sealed the letter, addressed it, sent it. Then she fed her cats. The reply she expected from Dumbledore would come or would not come, and the street would go on as it had. She had done what she always did. She observed, she reported, she remained in place. The arrangement had worked this way for a decade, and there was no reason to believe it would not continue to work. She did not imagine, sitting at her table with her cats and her cup of tea, that what she had put in the letter was anything other than the next item. In a long catalogue of items, she had put in letters, a plaster, a wrong frame, a collar stain, the details of a child's life on a street where she'd been posted to watch. She drank her tea and did not think about what the hospital had written down. The letter arrived at Hogwarts on a Wednesday morning. Dumbledore's office was quiet at that hour, the portraits in their frames mostly dozing, the silver instruments turning on their shelves and making their small sounds. He read the letter at his desk, with his half-moon spectacles and a cup of tea at his elbow that had gone entirely cold. He had not thought about Privet Drive in several weeks. He did not think about it the way he thought about the school or the work that occupied the foreground of his attention. These days, the long, careful work of watching for signs of what he knew was not entirely gone. Privet Drive was something he monitored through Arabella's reports. Dependable, brief, and generally telling him very little he did not expect. He read the letter twice. A hospital, a plaster above the eye. An injury significant enough that Petunia Dursley, who was not a woman who made decisions carelessly, and who had every reason to avoid the attention of Muggle institutions, had calculated the exposure of a hospital visit as preferable to the exposure of visible damage on the child. If Petunia had made that calculation, the injury had been considerable. He set the letter down on the desk. There was a question he could ask from here. What had the hospital recorded? He knew the broad shape of the answer before asking it. He had known the Dursleys on the 1st of November, 1981, had watched them through a long day before leaving Harry on their doorstep, and had known then the quality of the household he was choosing, not precisely, but approximately, in the way that a careful man permits himself to know things he does not intend to act on. He understood what careful language, the kind designed for files, might capture about a child from that house. He did not pursue the thought. He thought instead about what he always thought about when Privet Drive required thinking about. The protection. Lily's sacrifice, bound into the blood, imprinted on Petunia's home by the old and reliable magic of a mother who had chosen her child over herself. As long as Harry could call that house home, as long as he returned there each summer, as long as Petunia's roof was Harry's roof, even nominally, even in the thin and joyless way it had always been, the protection held. It was the structure everything else rested on. Voldemort was not gone. Not truly. The protection was the reason Harry was alive, and the reason Harry would remain alive, and the protection was bound to that house, to that family, to Petunia's blood, and nothing else. The arrangement was necessary. The arrangement was everything. He picked up his pen and wrote back to Arabella, "Thank you. Please continue to watch. Write to him if anything further developed." He folded it, sealed it, sent it. He looked at his desk for a moment after the hour left. Then he went to his next appointment, which was a curriculum matter that had been waiting 2 days, and Privet Drive receded to the middle distance where it generally lived. In his cupboard at number 4, Harry counted spiders. He had been counting them for years, in the way of someone who has been given a small space and has found a way to populate it. There were 8 he could identify by size and position on the ceiling. He'd named them in stages, starting with straightforward names and moving on to planets, and then street names he remembered from the bus, and now teachers at school, which was a longer list and was lasting him better. He was 3/4 of the way through the staff of St. Gregory's Primary. He could hear the post arriving. He could hear it from the cupboard, which was one of the things about the cupboard. You could hear almost everything from it, which was something he had not decided whether to consider a good thing or a bad one. The letterbox, the fall of envelopes, and then the particular quality of silence that meant Vernon had gotten there first. There had been more than one letter this morning. He didn't know what was in them. He didn't know what was in any of them. He lay on his back on his cot and looked at his spiders, and thought about what it was like to have things addressed to him and not be able to open them, and whether that was better or worse than not having things addressed to him at all. He decided he didn't know, which was not a satisfying conclusion, but it was honest. The post came again the next morning, and the morning after that. Each time he heard the letterbox and the silence that followed. He lay on his back with his 8 spiders and his 3/4 of a teaching staff, and he finished the list, and he started on Rivers. The summer continued in the particular way it always had, around him and without him, as if he were not exactly there. The hut on the rock had 1 window, and admitted all the wind that found it. Harry lay in a sleeping bag on the floor, eyes open, listening to the sea. He could hear it on all sides, water with no land behind it, dark and indifferent. Dudley had taken the only bed by virtue of being Dudley. Vernon and Petunia was somewhere behind a door that didn't close properly. The hut smelled of mildew and old damp. It was almost midnight. In a few minutes, he would be 11 years old. The hour passed without ceremony because there was no one to observe it. He lay in the sleeping bag and listened to the wind finding the gaps in the walls, and his birthday arranged itself around him the way all his birthdays had, as a date on a calendar that moved through and left no particular mark. Then something knocked on the door. Or not knocked. The door shook as though something enormous had placed one hand flat against it and leaned. There was the sound of wood protesting, and then the sound of a hinge giving, and then the door was simply no longer in the doorway. Harry scrambled upright. He could not see anything useful. His glasses, the broken frame, with its one cracked lens, was somewhere in the sleeping bag, and even with them on the dark was the dark. What filled the doorway was large, larger than any person he had seen. A shape that occupied the entire frame and suggested considerable more beyond it, wide and tall and blocking the sea wind, and with something about it that Harry could not name from this distance, a warmth, or the suggestion of warmth, the way you sense a fire before you can see it. The shape stepped inside, and the hut contracted around it. It produced a lantern that threw yellow across the room, and in that light Harry could make out a face, approximately, a vast dark beard, and a mass of wild tangled hair above it, and eyes like black beetles that caught the light. "Blimey!" said the enormous person looking at Harry. "Harry Potter!" Harry said nothing. He had been trained over many years not to speak first in uncertain situations. The person came further into the hut and set the lantern down and looked at Harry, careful, not unkind, the way you look at a thing you have thought about from a long distance. "Rubeus Hagrid," the person said, and extended a hand the approximate size of a small shovel. "Keeper o' keys and grounds at Hogwarts." He paused. He was looking at Harry's face, at the eye, specifically, the left one, where the healed line above the brow had faded, but not entirely gone. What happened there? The question came out the way the man himself apparently did, without calculation, direct, noticing, and not pretending not to. Petunia, from somewhere behind the broken door, made a small, tight sound. "It healed," Harry said, which was true and brief. Hagrid looked at him for a moment more, with the expression of someone who had heard the answer, and also heard what was beside it. Then he set about making himself at home in the hut with the comfortable certainty of a man who has occupied many small spaces, and he produced sausages from somewhere inside his enormous coat and put them over the fire. And he handed Harry an envelope. "Ah! Been trying to get this to you for a while," he said. "Happy birthday, by the way." Harry looked at the envelope. He could read it at close range. It said, "Mr. H. Potter," in the same green ink as all the others. He opened it. What followed? The reading of the letter, the sausages, the questions and the answers. Harry received the way he received most new information, with a steadiness that looked like calm from the outside. His parents had not died in a car crash. He was a wizard. The name Hagrid wouldn't say, said in a whisper finally, with the manner of someone naming something they have spent years training themselves not to name, had come to kill him when he was a year old, and killed his parents, and tried to kill Harry, and the killing curse had bounced back and struck the caster instead. And the only mark left on Harry had been the scar. "That's what you get," Hagrid said, his voice lower here, "when a powerful dark curse touches ye. But it didn't work on you, and nobody knows why, and that's why you're famous, Harry. That's why every witch and wizard knows your name." Harry touched the lightning bolt scar on his forehead with 2 fingers. "It can't be healed," he said. "No," Hagrid said. "Not by any magic we know." Harry moved his fingers away from his forehead. The scar had been there his whole life, and he had never thought much about it. The Dursleys gave him a car crash, and he had filed it and not examined it, the way you don't examine the parts of your story that have always been there. Now it was a different kind of thing. He put his hand down. He thought about this. He had not yet found the edges of how large it was. While Harry was doing this, Hagrid looked at the hut. He had been not looking at it since he arrived, in the concentrated way of a man keeping himself focused on the task in front of him. But now he let himself look the sleeping bags on the floor. The single window and the sea wind through it. Harry's shirt, Dudley's old green one, hanging from his shoulders with no particular illusion of a body underneath it, several sizes too large in the shoulders and the chest and the arms, the healed line above the eye. The broken glasses frame with its one cracked lens and one empty side, sitting at a crooked angle on the bridge of a nose that had been repaired more than once, though not by any surgeon. He had carried this boy on a motorcycle on the 1st of November 1981. A borrowed motorcycle, Sirius's, because his own bike wasn't built for a night like that. And Dumbledore had asked. And when Dumbledore asked Hagrid, he went. He'd wrapped the baby in his coat because the night was cold, and he'd handed him over at the doorstep and cried, which he wasn't ashamed of. And Dumbledore had said the boy would be all right, and Hagrid had believed him, because Dumbledore was who you believed. He looked at the hut. He sat with what he found in it. He was not an investigator. He was not a strategist. He was a man who had wondered for 10 years if the baby was all right, in the background of his days, the way you wonder about things you have set in motion and cannot follow. The wondering had been quiet. He had trusted the man. He trusted the answer was here, in a hut on a rock, and it was not all right. Later, after the sausages, after the revelations, after Vernon had made his objections and been outlasted, and after Dudley had received a small pig's tail that Hagrid apologized for, he'd aimed for the full transformation and slightly missed. It was a little squashed, pink icing, and green letters that read A-P-E-B, Bartes D-D-R. Harry, in slanted, effortful writing. Harry looked at it. He couldn't quite read the icing from arm's length without his glasses at the right angle, but the shape of it was enough. He looked at it for a moment, at the pink and the green and the letters that had clearly taken some effort, and something very small moved in his chest. Nameless. "Made it myself," Hagrid said, with a certain defensiveness. "The letters, weren't as easy as I thought." Harry ate the cake. He ate it in the hut on the rock, with the sea going on outside, with Hagrid across the fire from him, whose face he could not entirely make out at this distance, but whose general direction seemed, from what he could tell, to be approximately watching, or perhaps not watching. He couldn't be sure. He ate it anyway. He was 11 years old. Someone had baked him a cake and brought it across the sea in a coat. He did not know what a Hogwarts was, yet, in any sense that would be useful. He did not know what a wizard was, in any way he could verify. He knew his parents' names for the first time, James and Lily, and he knew they had been murdered, and that the murderer was not dead, and he knew that the scar on his forehead was the mark of something that had tried to kill him. He knew he was eating a cake with his name on it. He ate it carefully, all of it, and licked the icing from his thumb, and did not say anything about how it tasted, which was the best thing he had ever eaten in his life. Petunia sat behind the broken door in the dark and did not move. The person who had delivered Harry to her doorstep had come to collect him, and the person who had written his file was 2 counties away in a record system she could not reach, and both were true at the same time, in the same hut, in the same night. She sat with both of them, and said nothing, which was what she was good at, and let the sea do what it was going to do, regardless. The new glasses had no tape. This was the detail Harry kept returning to on platform 9 3/4, while the Hogwarts Express produced steam around him and families said their goodbyes to other people's children. He had bought the glasses in Diagon Alley, round, wire-framed, from a shop near the potion ingredients that smelled of copper and old things, and they sat on his nose now with no tape, no repair, no emergency engineering. They simply held. He touched the bridge of them. He did it 4 times between the barrier and the train. The Hogwarts Express was large and very red, and moved through England at a speed that let him watch the counties change from his window seat. Harry sat with his face turned slightly toward the glass and watched the fields go past, green and then grey and then very green again, and when the trolley came along the corridor, he ate what he wanted without any particular calculation about whether he was allowed to want it. The chocolate frogs were real. He hadn't quite believed that in the abstract. He believed it now. When one made a determined leap for the window before he got a grip on it, the famous witch on the card was someone he would have to look up. The every flavor beans were exactly what they claimed. He ate grass, and then pepper, and then something that could only have been earwax, and then found an apple one, and ate 3 more of those before stopping while he was ahead. He sat with the wrappers around him, and the countryside going past, and did not name what he was feeling, because he didn't quite have the language for it yet. It was something like, I am supposed to be here. Something like, the train is taking me somewhere. It has always been going. He ate the rest of the chocolate and watched England become Scotland. The Great Hall was everything the first years had been told it would be, and then more. Harry walked in behind Professor McGonagall, who had led them up from the boats with the composure of someone for whom the magic of it had long since become entirely ordinary. And the ceiling was the night sky, and the sky was full of stars and hundreds of floating candles, and the 4 long tables, with a warm brightness of somewhere people ate together and were allowed to take up space. He looked up at the ceiling for too long, and stumbled slightly, and caught himself, and kept walking. Minerva McGonagall held the sorting hat and the list of names, and let herself look at Harry Potter. She had last seen him when he was a year old. The 1st of November, 1981. A long, cold night watching the Dursleys from a garden wall, watching Hagrid arrive on the borrowed motorcycle with a bundle in his coat, watching Dumbledore carry the bundle to the doorstep and leave a letter there. She had argued her objections clearly that night, as she argued everything, directly, without decoration. Dumbledore had listened and weighed them and set them aside. He had said the boy would be safe. He had said this family was the only arrangement that would hold. She had spent 10 years not quite thinking about it, in the particular way of someone who has been overruled by someone they trust, and has not entirely forgiven themselves for accepting the override. Now, the boy was here. He was 11 years old, and his hair was exactly as ungovernable as it had appeared from a garden wall in the dark, and he was thin. She registered this in the same instant. She registered the glasses, new but already sitting slightly crooked on his nose. He blinked in the candlelight. He had the look of someone working hard not to let their astonishment be visible. She had Dumbledore's word that Harry had been fine at Privet Drive. Quote, looking at him now, thin-faced, blinking, with the carefully contained expression of a child who has learned to check his reactions before they arrive, she thought fine was carrying a great deal of weight as a word. She set the sorting hat on the stool. She unrolled the list and began. Harry's name she called the same as all the others, and he sat on the stool, and the hat came down over his eyes, and the pause before the hat called out its decision was longer than most, during which McGonagall kept her face perfectly even, because that was what she kept her face. And Harry pulled the hat from his head and went to the Gryffindor table, and the table erupted, and he sat in the middle of the noise, with the particular expression of someone who is not certain what to do. She went back to the list and kept calling names. In the weeks that followed, Harry filed information. This was how he processed things that were new, not with excitement in the first instance, or not primarily, but with a cataloguing impulse, a need to understand the shape of a thing before trusting it. At Hogwarts, he found teachers who knew his name before he gave it, students who wanted to be near him, which was an unfamiliar quantity, and took some adjustment. Food at every meal that exceeded anything he had a basis for expecting. Classes that assumed he had a mind worth directing at problems. And somewhere past the staircases on the upper floors, a hospital wing with a school matron in it who could heal the kind of injuries that had previously required Petunia's car, and an afternoon and a file opened in a record system. He filed this last piece carefully, without knowing what slot it belonged in. At night in the Gryffindor dormitory, he could not sleep because the bed was too soft. He was used to the thin cupboard mattress, and then Dudley's spare room, and the sleeping bag on the floor of the hut on the rock, and his body had formed opinions about surfaces that pushed back. The four-poster bed offered no resistance at all, and his body didn't know what to make of it. He lay in the dark and made lists, which was how he spent the dark when sleep didn't come. The food, the glasses with no tape, the bed that was too soft but was his, with curtains he could draw. The fact that people said his name with a warmth that suggested his name was good news. The ceiling of the great hall being the actual sky. And then, beneath all of it, the hospital. He had been thinking about it in the background all term, not urgently, in the way he thought about things he hadn't yet classified. The hospital had been the first time someone put him somewhere specific for the specific purpose of examining him and finding out what was wrong. He hadn't asked for it. Petunia had done it from her own calculation. But the examination had happened. The doctor had looked, the pen had moved, and a file had been opened, and the file had a number. Hogwarts was also a place where he had been put somewhere specific. It was also a place where people looked at him, with warmth, which was different, but with the same underlying attentiveness of those who had information about him that predated his arrival. They knew his name and his parents' names, and the shape of what had happened in 1981. He was not here to be examined for injuries. He was here to be enrolled in something larger than himself. He lay in the dark and kept the question open. How alike these two things were, or how unlike the way he kept questions he hadn't placed yet, without urgency, as something to return to when he knew more. The castle made its night-time sounds around him, stone and wind and distant water. He listened to it until it became background, and eventually fell asleep. And the term continued, and November went on being November outside the dormitory windows, and Harry Potter was in all the ways that could be measured from the outside. October came to Privet Drive, the way October always came. Shorter days, wet leaves on the pavement, the neighbors putting their garden furniture away. Number 4 was quieter this year. Dudley's gang had stopped coming at the end of August when the school term started, and Dudley's attention redirected, and without the gang, the street outside had a different quality to it, a stillness that Petunia moved through without naming. The cupboard under the stairs was empty. She had walked past it twice in September and registered a difference the way you register a tooth that is no longer there, not painfully, but constantly, in the absence of something that had been background long enough to become part of the structure of the house. She did not think about this deliberately. She had spent 11 years not thinking about things deliberately, and she was very good at it. The post came on a Thursday morning in the middle of October. Vernon was at the breakfast table with his newspaper and his second cup of tea, and Dudley had left for school, and Petunia was at the kitchen counter when she heard the letterbox. She didn't hear Vernon get up. By the time she turned around, he was already back in his chair, and the post was nowhere visible, and he had the specific quality of stillness he had when he was waiting for her not to ask about something. She dried her hands on the tea towel and said nothing. She knew this quality of stillness. She had been living with it for a long time. Vernon finished his tea. He read the rest of his newspaper. He got up, kissed Petunia on the cheek in the efficient way of a man completing a morning checklist, and left for work. She listened to the car pull out of the drive. Then she went to the bin. The letter was in pieces. Not small, just torn twice, the way Vernon tore things when he wanted them gone, but hadn't lost his composure. The letterhead on the largest piece. Another fragment said parent or guardian. There was a third piece she could read the phrase from, at your earliest convenience. She stood at the bin with her hand on the lid. Vernon's logic was not difficult to reconstruct. She had been reconstructing his logic for 20 years and had become efficient at it. He had destroyed letters before. A great many letters, green envelopes, dozens of them, and she had not told him what those were from. And he had destroyed them anyway, because destroying things you do not understand is a strategy that had served Vernon Dursley reliably across a 52-year life. He had destroyed the Hogwarts letters, and eventually Hagrid had come, and in Vernon's understanding of events, Hagrid was the reason everything had gone wrong. Not the letters, not the strategy, not anything Vernon had done. The large, terrifying person had come and taken Harry, and that was the cause, in Vernon's version, and the letters were not relevant to the cause. And now here was another set of letters, from a Muggle institution. Vernon did not fear Muggle institutions the way he feared, obliquely, without direct acknowledgement, the wizarding world. Muggle institutions played by rules he understood. You ignored them, they warned you again, you ignored them again, and eventually they moved on to someone who wasn't ignoring them. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. She put the bin lid down. She did not retrieve the letter pieces. There was nothing useful to do with them now. If she took them out and left them on the counter, Vernon would come home to them, and she would need to have a conversation she did not want to have. A conversation in which she would have to explain why an NHS health visitor letter was different from any other letter he had disposed of. And she could not explain that without explaining things she had never explained to Vernon about August, about the hospital, about a file in a record system with Harry's name at the top. She closed the bin. She put the kettle on. The quality of the fear she was feeling was not entirely new. It had a specific texture that she had encountered before, in 1981, when a bundle had arrived on her step with a letter, and she had understood in the first minutes of reading that something had been set in motion that could not be stopped by closing doors. You could close the door, you could not prevent what was behind it from continuing to exist and move toward you. The NHS would send another letter. It was required to. When the second letter also produced no response, it was required to send someone, a health visitor, a social worker, a person with a notepad and a case reference number who would knock on the door and expect to be answered. When that happened, she would be answering about a child who was at a school that did not appear in any directory, at an address that could not be found by any Muggle, means a school with no listed phone number and no entry in any county record. She would be expected to account for Harry's whereabouts and well-being, to a person whose job required them to be satisfied before they left. She poured the water over her tea and stood at the counter. She had managed things for 10 years by managing them. The managing had always, eventually, produced sufficient results. Not perfect results, not results she was proud of, but sufficient. Sufficient had always been enough. She was beginning to understand that sufficient was running out of road. 2 streets away, on Wisteria Walk, Arabella Figg was in her kitchen. When she heard the engine slow outside, she went to the front window. The vehicle was white with a logo on the side, NHS Community Health, and it was moving the way vehicles moved when they were looking rather than going somewhere. At that particular pace, slightly below traffic speed, driver's attention on the doors and numbers. It reached the junction with Privet Drive, slowed, and turned in. She moved to the side window. The angle was better from there, and she could see it travel the length of Privet Drive at the same careful pace, past the privet hedges and the identical gardens, past number 4, which it slowed further for without stopping, and then on to the end of the road and out of sight. Not stopping was its own kind of information. Stopping would have meant a visit. Not stopping meant looking, confirming an address, noting the day and time, deciding when to come back. She had lived near enough to schools and social services offices, long enough to know what that slow drive meant. She moved away from the window and sat down at her kitchen table. Dumbledore had asked her to watch and write if anything developed. A health visitor's vehicle making a slow pass at number 4 Privet Drive in October, 6 weeks after Harry had gone to Hogwarts, seemed like a development. She thought about writing. She looked at the pen on the table. She decided to wait. Not because it wasn't significant, but because she had learned, over 10 years, that writing to Dumbledore was a tool to be used when she was certain rather than when she suspected. She was not yet certain. She would watch and see what came next. She made her tea and fed her cats, and the afternoon continued as it had begun. And on Privet Drive the NHS vehicle did not return that day, and number 4's curtains stayed drawn, and the street was quiet, in the particular way it had been quiet all autumn, as though something that had always been present had been removed from it. And the absence was not yet used to itself. The second letter was different from the first. It arrived on a Wednesday morning in the 3rd week of November, 3 weeks after Vernon had torn the NHS letter into the bin without comment. This one came from a different header. Surrey County Council. Children's Services. It was thicker. 3 pages, not 1. And it had a case reference number printed in the top right corner of every page. Petunia intercepted it before Vernon came downstairs. She read it once at the kitchen counter with the pages in her hand. The language was polite, formal, and unhurried. The language of something that had all the time in the world, backed by something that did. A welfare check had been scheduled in response to a referral from the NHS Community Health Service. A social worker would attend 4 Privet Drive on the 28th of November at 10 in the morning for a routine visit concerning Harry James Potter, aged 11. She burned it in the kitchen sink. She read it twice more to fix the date and time, then tore it and lit the pieces on the hob, and ran the tap until the ash was gone. Vernon came down at 7:30 to find her making toast. "Nothing interesting in the post," he said. "Good." She poured his tea. She had 5 days. The room had been Harry's in name since August, when Vernon had moved him there from the cupboard, after letters had begun arriving addressed to the cupboard under the stairs, an address that had produced in Vernon a specific kind of unease he had never found the words for. In practice, the room still held evidence of Dudley's prior occupation, a broken toy chest, a shelf of games Dudley had long since abandoned, Petunia had changed the sheets before Harry left for Hogwarts in September. She had not been back since. She went in now. She cleared the shelf. In the spare room drawer, she found a photograph of a horse torn from a magazine and a picture of a footballer she'd cut from something without purpose, and she put the footballer on the wall with adhesive. She found a Hardy Boys paperback on the hall shelf and put it on the desk. She stood in the doorway and looked at the room. She moved the lamp to the desk and angled it so it appeared consulted. She opened the curtains a specific amount. She put the bin from the corner beside the desk, where a child who used the room would put it. She picked a thread from the carpet and then considered, and got a thread from her sewing box and put it back. She was not sure looking at the room on Thursday that it was convincing, less sure on Friday, less still on Saturday. She had managed a great many things in this house, but she had never before needed to provide evidence of an ordinary childhood. No one had ever been invited to look. The social worker arrived at 10:10 on the 28th of November. She was a woman in her late 30s, short, dark hair, padded jacket, a large bag from which she produced a folder with practiced ease. She did not look like someone conducting an interrogation. She looked like someone who had done exactly this visit, this street, this folder, a very large number of times. And that ease was, Petunia found, considerably worse than if she had looked threatening. Petunia knew how to manage Mrs. Dursley. She shook Petunia's hand. "Thank you for being available," Petunia said. "Of course, please come in," and smiled the smile she had for teachers and neighbors and the post office. She had made tea and put biscuits on a plate. They sat in the living room. The social worker opened her folder. She had a form, a pen, and a manner that was not unfriendly, and was not what you would describe as relaxed. She said the visit was routine. They followed up whenever there had been no response to the initial correspondence. She understood letters, sometimes didn't get through. "I'm afraid we did miss one," Petunia said. "I apologize. It was a busy time." The social worker wrote something. She asked about Harry. Petunia gave his age, his build, his temperament, in the order a prepared person gives information smoothly, without pausing, as if the answers were simply there and not rehearsed. She asked about school. Petunia said boarding school, which she had prepared for, and which was true, and said the name, Hogwarts, and spelled it, because she had decided in advance that spelling it without being asked would look cooperative and calm rather than nervous. The social worker wrote down Hogwarts. "And what county would that be in Scotland?" Petunia said. "It's in Scotland." The social worker wrote down Scotland. She didn't look up from the form. "You'd be able to provide a contact number for the school?" "They're rather traditional about that. They prefer correspondence. Term ends soon. Harry will be home for Christmas." "That's good to hear. I'd like to speak with Harry then, if you'd be happy with that. Just a brief chat. Routine." She looked up. "Nothing to worry about." "Of course," Petunia said. "Could I see his room?" Petunia led her upstairs. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom while the social worker went inside. The woman didn't touch anything. She looked at the bed, the desk with the lamp, the shelf with the paperback, the footballer poster on the wall. She looked at the surface of the desk. She looked at the carpet. She noted something on her form. Then she noted two more things. After a moment, she said mildly, still writing, "It's a very tidy room. Does Harry always keep it like this?" "He's particular," Petunia said. "He's always been particular about his things," the social worker finished writing. She looked at the room once more, not at the individual objects, but at the room as a whole, with the expression of someone assembling information that would mean more when combined with other information. Then she thanked Petunia and they went back downstairs. Petunia answered every remaining question. She had an answer for every question. She had prepared answers for 11 categories of question, and the social worker stayed within them all. Harry's health, his diet, his schooling before Hogwarts, his relationship with Dudley, who was at school today, his temperament, which Petunia described as self-sufficient, which was true. She answered without hesitation, with warmth that sounded natural because she had calibrated it carefully, and offered a second cup of tea, which the social worker declined. The social worker thanked her. She said she would be in touch. She gathered her folder and her form, which had considerably more on it than when she had arrived, and Petunia walked her to the door and said goodbye with exactly the right smile. She closed the door. She stood in the hall for a moment with her hand still on the latch. She had managed things like this for a long time. Teachers who noticed something. The dentist who had mentioned once that Harry seemed underweight. Neighbors who asked the wrong sort of question. She had developed over a decade the ability to perform a particular version of herself in these situations. Calm, cooperative, entirely unconvincing of anything being wrong, and the performance had always been sufficient. This had not felt like sufficient. The social worker had noticed the room. She had not said so in any words that could be argued with, but Petunia knew the difference between a note taken for completion and a note taken because something had been found. The social worker had taken the second kind. Vernon came home at 6 to the biscuit plate, still on the coffee table, and the sofa cushions in the wrong places, and Petunia told him what she had to tell him before he found out another way that a social worker had visited today about Harry. The next 40 minutes were, in their particular way, predictable. Vernon's rage had consistent properties and variable targets. Tonight, the primary target was Petunia, for not telling him, and the secondary was the social worker, for coming. Harry's name did not come up directly. It never came up directly in this house. There was a way of having extended, furious discussions about everything that orbited Harry without ever saying the name at the center, and they had practiced it for years. When it was over, Vernon sat in the armchair, and Petunia sat on the sofa, and the room went quiet, in the spent way it went quiet after those evenings. Harry Potter was at Hogwarts in Scotland, which had no phone number a social worker in Surrey could find. And somewhere in Surrey there was a filing cabinet with a folder in it, and in the folder a form with a case reference number and a social worker's handwriting about, among other things, a very tidy room. It had a great deal more written on it than that. But that was the part Petunia was thinking about in the quiet of the evening, the part she couldn't make the shape of yet. It was not the end of an inquiry. She had known that in the doorway of the bedroom. She had seen it in the second kind of note. Arabella Figg wrote to Dumbledore on the 1st of December. She had watched the car arrive on the 28th of November. Not the NHS van she had noted in October, but a different vehicle from the council, and it had parked at number 4 for 40 minutes, with no pretense of coincidence. She had seen the woman in the padded jacket ring the bell and be let inside. She had counted the minutes because counting the minutes was the kind of thing she was good at. She had been doing this work for 10 years, and she knew the difference between a visit that was preliminary and one that was looking for something. She had told herself in October, when the NHS van made its slow confirming pass, that she would wait until she was certain rather than suspected. 40 minutes with the council car was certain enough. She wrote the letter at her kitchen table with the radio on low and a cat on either side of her feet. She was brief, as she always was. Dumbledore did not need her opinion, only her facts. A welfare check car from the local authority attended number 4 on the 28th of November. A woman, professional in manner, padded jacket, large bag. Inside for approximately 40 minutes. Number 4's curtains remained entirely undisturbed throughout the visit. The woman left. Before she even reached her car, she had taken out her form and was writing on it. And Arabella had watched that too. The specific quality of someone writing because they have found something rather than because they are completing a routine. She sealed the letter. She sent it. She fed her cats. She sat for a while afterward in the quiet of her kitchen and tried not to think about what she was really reporting, which was that the Muggle world had taken an interest in Harry Potter, and that it had moved considerably faster than anyone on Dumbledore's side of things. She did not say that in the letter. It was not the kind of thing she said in letters. She thought it, and thought it again, and then fed her cats a second time because she had forgotten she'd already done it, which was the sort of thing that happened when she was thinking about something else. Dumbledore read the letter on the 3rd of December, which was the earliest he could attend to it. His office was quiet at that hour. The portrait's occupants were mostly away on their rounds of other paintings, leaving the frames draped in whatever landscape or chair their subjects had vacated. The silver instruments on the shelves turned without sound. He read at his desk with his half-moon spectacles and the particular attentiveness he gave to Arabella's letters. She was brief, factual, and accurate. And when she wrote welfare check car, she knew the difference between a welfare check car. He set the letter down. He had been since August in what he might have described, to someone he trusted with the description, as a state of careful avoidance. He had Arabella's letter from August. Harry came back from somewhere with a plaster above his eye and his glasses wrong. He had the reply. He had written, watch and report, nothing more. He was aware, with the precision of a man who had spent a century developing precision, that watch and report was not what the situation called for. It was what he called for. It was the instruction that produced the least disruption to the arrangements he had made in 1981. He was aware that this was exactly what it was. The council had now sent someone, with a form, who had stood in the room and found something and written it down. He took off his spectacles and held them in his hands. He thought about the welfare system the way you thought about something you had been deliberately not thinking about, with the awareness that avoidance is itself a decision. A Muggle authority system had a file on Harry Potter. The system had a process, and the process moved without regard for what Dumbledore had arranged in 1981, because the Muggle welfare system had never been told what he had arranged in 1981, and could not have been told. The system moved by its own rules. The system moved. The next step, and he knew this, because he was 109 years old and had watched Muggle institutions since before most of their current staff were born, was contact with the school. They would want to verify Harry's attendance. They would search for Hogwarts in whatever directories they searched in. They would find nothing. They would not stop there. They would contact the local authority in whatever region they presumed the school to be in, and that authority would confirm what Surrey had already found. There was no school called Hogwarts. The case would expand. That was what cases did when the facts did not resolve them. This was something he had not fully considered in August. He had considered the hospital file. He had considered a follow-up letter as a theoretical event. He had not fully considered what a Muggle investigator would do when a child enrolled in a school that did not appear in any Muggle record. The blood protection required that Harry be able to call 4 Privet Drive home. It required that he return there each summer. It did not require anything about the satisfiability of Muggle welfare inquiries. But if the inquiry produced a formal outcome, if Harry were removed from the Dursleys' custody by a court order, which was the machinery of the process he could see unfolding, then the house would cease to be home, in the only sense that mattered for the protection. And Voldemort was not gone. He was something less than a body, something more than an absence. And the protection was the reason Harry had survived the decade since 1981, and would continue to survive the years ahead. He put his spectacles back on. There was a second thing. He had been not approaching it for months, since August, since Arabella's first letter, in the way he didn't approach things he wasn't ready for. Parallel to the blood protection, parallel to the welfare inquiry, running beside them without touching them. What the hospital had found, what careful language the kind written into a file would have said about the bones of a nose that had been repaired more than once. About a child who was small for his age in ways that had nothing to do with genes. He had known, on the 1st of November 1981, the quality of the household he was choosing, not precisely. He had examined it approximately, and then called the approximation sufficient, and called the blood protection necessity, and named the arrangement a sacrifice made in service of Harry's survival. Harry had survived. The hospital file was also true. Both were true simultaneously, and he had been holding them at sufficient distance from each other that they appeared separate, one in the column of reasons the decision had been correct, and one in a column he had not named. He sat with this. He had sat with uncomfortable things for a century. He had a considerable facility for it. This one had a quality he had not encountered many times in that century. The thing he hadn't quite examined had been examined by someone else. A doctor had looked. The doctor had written it down. The file existed in a building in Surrey, in a cabinet, regardless of what Dumbledore did or did not think about it from his office in Scotland. The looking had already happened. The record was already there. There was, he reflected, something clarifying about that. He was not certain. Clarifying was the same as comfortable. He picked up his pen. He wrote to Arabella, "Watch carefully. Do not approach anyone from the council unless approached directly. Write to him at once if another visit occurred, or if anyone attempted to contact Harry directly." He folded the letter, sealed it, sent it. He put the pen down. He looked at the desk drawer, the one where he kept correspondence that required no immediate action, the kind of action that could be deferred without apparent consequence, while other things were attended to. He had not put Arabella's August letter in the drawer. Precisely. He had filed it with the other Privet Drive correspondence in a folder, which was a more organized form of the same thing. He looked at the drawer anyway. After a moment, he went to his next meeting. It was a curriculum matter. It had been waiting several days. He gave it his full attention because he was Albus Dumbledore, and giving things his full attention was something he could do regardless of what else was sitting in the filing cabinet of his mind, parallel and not quite touching. The drawer, when he returned, was where he had left it. Harry came back from the Christmas holidays on the 2nd of January. Bam! McGonagall was in the entrance hall when he arrived with the other returning students, and she registered him in the way. She registered all of them, attendance confirmed, well-being approximate. He was in a group but not of it. He had that quality she had noticed since September, of being near people without being in them, of leaving a slight margin around himself that most people didn't notice because most people weren't looking for it. He was carrying his trunk with the determined self-sufficiency of a child who had had long practice at carrying his own things. He was thinner than he had been in September, or perhaps she was wrong about that. It was the January light, the cold entrance hall. She was not a woman who invented things, and she could not say with certainty. She went to find Dumbledore. His office was occupied, a meeting that ran until 3:15, and she waited outside it with the patience of a woman who had spent 40 years in corridors. When the meeting ended, she went in and shut the door behind her. "Minerva," Dumbledore said. "Ma." The word carried, as it always did, when he said her name in that particular tone, the weight of a man preparing for a conversation he has been expecting and has not been looking forward to. "What is Harry Potter's situation at his aunt and uncle's house?" He did not answer immediately. He took off his half-moon spectacles and set them on the desk. This was, she had learned over decades, a gesture that meant he was gathering himself for a response that required more care than the truth would need. "Harry has settled into Hogwarts very well," he said. "He is an exceptional. That is not what I asked." He looked at her. "I have been watching that child since September," she said. "I watched him come in, and I have watched him every day since. And I watched him come back from Christmas. And what I see is a child who has been taught to take up as little space as possible, and has become very good at it." She paused. She was not going to moderate her tone. Moderation was not useful here. "You told me he would be fine. I told you he would be safe. You told me he would be fine," she said again. "That is the word you used. On the 1st of November 1981, at 11:30 at night, with a baby, on a doorstep, you told me this family was the right place for him, and that he would be fine. Minerva, I watched those people." She had spent 10 years not saying this, and it came out even. She had thought it might not. "All day, from a garden wall, I watched Vernon Dursley leave for work. I watched Petunia Dursley close her curtains against the street. I told you that evening what I thought of them. The worst sort of muggles, I said. And I did not think it was the right place for a child. I was not casual about it. I put it to you directly." She let the silence sit for a beat. "You told me Harry would be fine." He was quiet for a moment. "The blood protection," he said. She waited. "Lily's sacrifice," he said. "When she chose to die for Harry, she created a protection, ancient magic, irreplicable, bound to the blood of her surviving family. As long as Harry can call Petunia Dursley's house home, as long as he returns there, as long as Petunia's roof is his roof, Voldemort cannot touch him, not there, not anywhere he carries that home with him." He paused. "You know what Voldemort is capable of. Harry is the only person who has ever survived the killing curse. The blood protection is not one solution among several. There was no other arrangement that would hold." "I understand the blood protection," McGonagall said. She said it quietly. "I am not disputing the blood protection," she said. "I am not telling you it was wrong to need it. I am telling you that the blood protection requires Harry to live in that house, and what you chose was to leave him there without examining what living in that house meant for a child inside it." She looked at him steadily. "Those are two different things, Albus. You needed the arrangement. You chose not to examine what the arrangement required of him, and then you called it the same decision. He did not argue. This was not the same as agreeing." He folded his hands on the desk. "There is something," he said, "that I should tell you." She waited. He told her about Arabella Figg's letter from August. Harry had come home one afternoon in a car, with Petunia, not walked, not sent ahead alone. In a car, in the afternoon, which was unusual enough that Arabella had noted it. He had a plaster above his eye. His glasses were bent. Petunia had taken him somewhere that Arabella's instinct said was a hospital. McGonagall said nothing. He told her that the instinct had been correct. A Muggle, A and E, in August. One of the lenses from Harry's glasses had cut above his eye when they broke. The doctor had done an examination. An X-rays show prior injuries, he said. old-healed changes to the nasal bones consistent with repeated impact. He said it in the careful, slightly removed language of a man who has been approaching something for months without quite arriving at the center of it. The doctor noted his weight. He wrote it in a file. McGonagall was looking at the desk. The file generated a follow-up letter, he said. Then a health visitor. Then a formal welfare check. A social worker attended the house in November. The case has a reference number. Arabella saw the council car. That is what she wrote to me about. In December, he paused. The investigation is ongoing. The room was quiet. In the portraits, the painted former headmasters sat with the careful stillness of people who have decided not to be present for a conversation. A Muggle doctor, McGonagall said. A Muggle doctor examined him, she said, and opened a file. The pause she left was precise. We have been his guardians for 10 years. We have not opened a file. Another pause, shorter than the first. We have left that to the Muggles. She was not asking a question. She was placing a fact in the room and permitting him to see it. He did not speak for a moment. The silver instruments turned on their shelves. The room was very quiet. I was not certain, he said at last, when I left him on that doorstep that he would be fine. I was certain that he would survive. Voldemort is not gone. Reduced, something less than a body, but not gone. And when he returns, Harry must be able to meet it. The blood protection is the architecture on which everything else is built. And I needed Harry to be alive and protected when the time came. He paused. I was certain of survival. I told myself that was the same as fine. He looked at his hands. I am aware that they are not the same. No, she said. They are not. The room stayed quiet. I cannot undo 10 years, he said. It was, she thought, possibly the most honest sentence she had heard him say in 4 decades of knowing him. I cannot undo the X-rays, or the file, or the doctor's notes, or any of the decisions that have produced this conversation. I am aware that the investigation will not stop because I would prefer it to. He looked at her. I am beginning to understand what I did not examine. Beginning, she said. It was not unkind. It was precise. She paused with her hand on the latch, which was where the things she needed to say fully rather than strategically tended to come to her. When the Muggle investigation requires a response from the wizarding world, and it will, Albus, a child enrolled in a school that appears in no Muggle directory, will eventually require explanation, you will need to decide whose interests you are managing. She did not turn to say it. She did not need to see his face. I would suggest you decide that before it requires a response rather than after. She opened the door and went downstairs. Her first afternoon class was at 3:30. Second years, transfiguration, inanimate to animate conversion. She taught it very well, as she always did, moving between the tables, correcting wand angles, saying patient things to the ones who were struggling. At 4 o'clock, one student's matchbox stood up on 4 small wooden legs and walked off the edge of the desk, and the class laughed, and she let them laugh for a moment before calling them back. She thought about it after, in the quiet of her own rooms with a cup of tea she forgot to drink. She thought about a garden wall on the 1st of November 1981, and a man she had trusted, and a doorstep with a baby on it, and 10 years of not saying right up until this afternoon. When she had finally said it, she thought about whether saying it now, in January with a case reference number already sitting in a filing cabinet in Surrey, was enough, or whether enough was a category that no longer applied. She did not have an answer. She drank the tea cold and went to sleep. February arrived wet and the great hall windows ran with it. Harry had noticed Dumbledore at mealtimes since September. Everyone had. Dumbledore was not the sort of man who went unnoticed in a room. But since January, there was a different quality to it. It was not the broad survey of a headmaster watching 300 students. It was occasional and specific, with the quality of someone checking something they had been thinking about between checks. Harry's first instinct, and his most practiced one, was that it meant something was wrong with him. He was 11 years old and had 11 years of practice interpreting adult attention. Adult attention, in his experience, meant one of three things. You were in trouble, you were about to be given an unpleasant task, or something was visibly wrong with you that the adult had noticed and was deciding whether to mention. Kindness was not a category he had reliable data for. He was working on it. He had more evidence for it here than anywhere, but it was not yet his first interpretation. In February, he began going to the library in the evenings with a different purpose than homework. He was looking for blood protection. He had heard the phrase in August, in the hut on the rock when Hagrid had been explaining why he was alive. Something Dumbledore had set up, ancient magic, to do with his mother. Hagrid had started to explain and then pulled back, which was what adults did when they reached the edge of what they were permitted to say. Harry had filed the phrase away, and now, in February, later had arrived. He went through the indexes of everything shelved under charms, and then Defense Against the Dark Arts, and then a section of older books on the history of protective magic that smelled of a room that hadn't been opened in years. He found references to blood rights and bloodline inheritance and old protective spellwork. None of it called by the phrase Hagrid had used, nothing that matched what Hagrid had half described, a protection specific to a person, specific to a house, bound by a death and a choice. He thought about asking someone. He did not ask anyone. He kept coming back. He searched systematically and found nothing, and filed that too. Blood protection, the kind of magic that was not in books. The kind that was in people who knew and who had not told him. Dumbledore asked Hagrid to come to the office on a Tuesday afternoon in the first week of February. Hagrid arrived with the careful tidiness of a large man trying not to occupy more room than necessary, which was still, in Dumbledore's circular office, a very considerable amount of room. He sat in the chair reserved for students and held his pink umbrella between his hands, and did not ask what the meeting was about. He had been to Dumbledore's office enough times to know that asking sometimes made things longer. "I want to ask you about the hut on the rock," Dumbledore said. "The 31st of July when you arrived." Hagrid looked at him with his beetle-black eyes. "I want to know what you saw," Dumbledore said. "Not what happened. I know what happened, what you saw." Hagrid was quiet for a moment. He was not a slow man by nature, but there were things he talked slowly about, because the talking required more care than usual. "The sleeping bags," he said, "on the floor. There was one bed, but Harry wasn't in it. Dudley had the bed. Harry was on the floor, in a sleeping bag. The hut was cold." Dumbledore said nothing. "His clothes," Hagrid said. "His shirt, Dudley's, obviously from before Dudley got bigger. Except Harry wasn't much bigger than Dudley had been in it, several sizes too large in the chest and the arms. The sleeves." He stopped and started again. "He didn't have his glasses, the frames were broken, one lens gone. He was squinting at me from across the room." "And the eye," Dumbledore said quietly. "Healed," Hagrid said, "but recent. There was a line above the left brow where it had been." His voice had the particular flatness of a man managing what he feels by managing his sentences. I asked him what happened. He said it was healed. That's all he said. "What else did you see?" Hagrid's hands moved on the umbrella. "The cake," he said. I'd brought it, made it myself. It was a bit squashed from the journey. Pink icing and green letters. He couldn't read the writing properly without his glasses from where he was sitting, but he ate it. All of it. Very carefully, all of it. And I was sitting across the fire and couldn't see his face clearly enough to know what he was thinking. Another pause. I knew what I was thinking. The office was quiet. The silver instruments turned on their show. That's what I saw, Hagrid said in that hut. He looked at Dumbledore with the steadiness of a man who has held something for 6 months and is now setting it down somewhere to find out how heavy it actually was. Was that what you arranged? He said. When you took him there in 1981, was that what you meant to happen? Dumbledore did not say yes. He did not say no. I did not arrange everything that happened inside that house. Hagrid stared at him. He was not a sophisticated man, and he would have said so himself without embarrassment. He had never claimed to be. He couldn't always tell a good argument from a bad one. But he had been the boy left at Hogwarts, with nowhere else to be, and he understood in a way that went below argument the difference between doing something and being responsible for what came from it. No, Hagrid said. I suppose you didn't. He stood up. He was as large standing as sitting, which filled most of the room. He's all right now, he said. It was not a question. It was the thing he needed to say out loud and to have answered before he could leave. Dumbledore looked at him. He is at Hogwarts, he said. He is here. Hagrid looked at him for a moment longer, as if he were weighing whether this was the same as the thing he had asked, and deciding that it was close enough for tonight, and then he went downstairs. Harry found the mirror on a Thursday night. He had been wandering in the way he sometimes wandered when the library wasn't producing anything, and the dormitory was too early for sleep. Through corridors he hadn't been down yet, not going anywhere in particular, which was a freedom he was still learning to trust. The 4th floor corridor ended in a door that opened when he tried it, and inside was a room that smelled of cold dust and hadn't been used in some time, and in the middle of it was a mirror. It was enormous. Taller than Hagrid, he thought, with an ornate frame and an inscription along the top in letters that seemed to reverse themselves as he moved. He looked at the inscription for a moment, then at the mirror. In the mirror, he was not alone. He could see himself. Same glasses, same face, same hair, that never did anything he wanted. But there were people standing around and behind him, and in front of him, closest, a man and a woman. The woman had dark red hair and green eyes, and Harry looked at the eyes and then at his own reflection's eyes and felt something shift in his chest without quite having a name for it. The man standing beside her was tall and thin with dark hair that went in all directions and wore glasses, and he had his arm around the woman's shoulders, and they were both looking at Harry in the mirror with the full and settled attention of people who know exactly whose child this is. He stood there for a long time. He thought about the X-ray room. He had been thinking about it for months in the background where he put things not yet classified. The 2 minutes, alone with the radiographer and the machine that had seen inside him. The doctor afterward, writing things down in careful language without speaking them aloud. The file in the record system with his name on it, with the bones of his nose and his weight percentile and the doctor's notations. The people in the mirror did not have a file. They could not have examined him or noted anything or taken careful record of what they found. They were there and then they weren't. For 10 years. For all of his life. They had never had the chance to open a file or examine anything or put him somewhere specific to find out what was wrong. He was not sure what to wish for. He was 11, and the mirror was showing him his deepest wish, and his deepest wish was for 2 people who were dead, and a version of his life in which that hadn't happened. And he did not know what to do with this, except stand here and look at it, because looking at things directly, and this seemed like a place to practice. He stood there until the castle went entirely quiet around him. Then he walked back to the Gryffindor Tower and lay in the too-soft bed and looked at the curtains he could draw, which were his, and thought about the mirror until sleep found him. The social worker had been doing her job for 14 years, and she had a standard procedure for schools. She sent a letter requesting confirmation of enrollment. The school confirmed. She noted it and moved on. She had never had a school fail to confirm. The letter she sent to Hogwarts, Scotland in February came back undelivered 3 weeks later, bearing the post office's stamp for insufficient addressing. She tried the Scottish Education Authority. She tried the Charities Commission, which kept records of independent schools. She tried the area offices of every local authority in Scotland. There was no school called Hogwarts in any record she could locate. She noted this in the case file. She expanded the case note. She picked up the phone. Petunia was at the kitchen counter when it rang on a Thursday morning in March. She had known, since November, who it would eventually be. The social worker's voice was professional and unhurried, with the quality of someone who has made a very large number of calls of this kind. She said they had been unable to verify Harry's school enrollment through standard channels. She said she needed to speak with Harry directly. She said, and here Petunia's hand tightened on the counter, that she would need to do this before the end of April, and that if Harry was not available, she would need to know why. Petunia said she understood. She said Harry would be home for Easter. She said she would be in touch. She put the phone down. She stood at the counter with both hands on it and looked at the wall. She had managed things for 10 years. She had managed Vernon's moods and Dudley's demands and the neighbors' questions and the annual presence of a child she had not known how to love and had chosen not to. She had managed the hospital in August and the NHS letter in October and the social worker in November, and now a phone call in March, and she was very good at managing things, and this particular thing could not be managed. She sat down at the kitchen table. Harry could not be produced for an interview before Easter. He was at school, the school which was not in any directory in Scotland or anywhere else, and producing him early would require a conversation with Dumbledore, and producing him at all would produce precisely the questions she had been trying to prevent since August. Why was he thin? What happened to the nasal bones? What school is this, and where is it, and why can no one find it? She sat at the table for a long time. She did not think about Lily. She had not thought about Lily, if she could prevent it, for a decade. She thought instead about the arrangement, the specific arrangement made on her doorstep in the dark on the 2nd of November 1981, with Vernon asleep upstairs and a baby on the step and a letter explaining what she was being asked to accept. The letter had said, the blood arrangement would protect her family. She was 21 years old, and she had taken him in, and she had kept Harry Potter in her house for 10 years and 4 months, and she had not broken the arrangement. She got up. She got out the writing paper. It took her 3 drafts. The first was too much. It said things she had not said in 10 years and did not intend to say now, and it said them in the tone of a person who has been frightened for a very long time, which she was not going to put in a letter. She tore it up. The second was not quite right. Too sparse, too controlled, and the control was too visible. You could feel the first draft bleeding through the lines. The third draft was 2 paragraphs. The first explained the situation. A Muggle welfare investigation had been ongoing since August. The Surrey County Council Social Services Department required direct contact with Harry before the end of April. The school could not be verified through any Muggle channel. She was therefore writing to the only person responsible for this arrangement, who might be in a position to address what the arrangement had produced. The second paragraph said, in the careful language of someone carrying a thing for a long time, and not able to set it down carelessly, she had kept her end. She expected him to keep his. She did not mention Lily. She sent the letter. Dumbledore received it on a Friday evening in the 3rd week of March. He read it once. He sat with it, which was something he had been doing with a number of things lately, sitting and not resolving. Then he wrote to Arabella Figg. He asked her, in the careful language that she would understand as instruction rather than request, to speak to the social worker. Not officially, as a neighbor, as a woman who had known the family for years, who could speak to Harry's circumstances in the community, to reassure, to provide context. To confirm that Harry was being well cared for at a school where he was settled and happy. He sent the letter. Arabella Figg read it on a Saturday morning, with her reading glasses and her first cup of tea and a cat on the chair beside her. She read it twice. She set it down. She had been watching Harry Potter for 10 years. She knew his catalogue of injuries the way she knew her own cat's by nature and habit. Which knee was always scraped, which elbow, which was the eye that got worse when the gang was most active. She knew the way he held himself when the Dursleys were nearby, a particular economy of movement, a learned stillness, the way you carry yourself when you have understood that taking up too much space produces consequences. She had been glad of his company in the years when Petunia still used her, genuinely glad in the way she was glad of any company that was patient and quiet and did not require her to be anything specific. She had made him look at photographs of her cats because she could not explain what she actually knew, and the photographs were the only thing she had to give him that wouldn't require explanation. She had given him weak tea and stale biscuits, and let him sit in her sitting room on a summer afternoon when his family had somewhere else to be. In 10 years, she had not once seen anyone in that house put their arms around that boy. She knew what Dumbledore was asking her to do. She understood why he was asking it. She had known him for 30 years, and she understood the structures and the statute and the blood protection and everything the arrangement had been built to accomplish. And she understood that his instructions were in service of Harry's survival. She put on her coat. She walked to the council offices. She did not go as Dumbledore had instructed. She told them about the clothes. Dudley's hand-me-downs, several sizes too large, worn past the point where most children's cast-offs were thrown away. She told them about the glasses, the tape on the frames, not once, not by accident. Frame after frame, bent and broken and taped back into use, because new glasses were not a thing that happened. She told them about the way Harry positioned himself in the garden, always near a wall or a fence, with the awareness of open space that you developed when open space had been used against you. She told them that she had lived 2 streets away for a decade and had seen Harry Potter nearly every week of every year. And she had never once heard his uncle speak to him with anything approaching warmth, or seen his aunt touch him gently, or watched anyone in that house look at him as though they were glad he was there. She said, "He is somewhere now that is safe." She said, "When you speak to him, you will be able to see it, and you should speak to him, because the question you are really asking is not about where he is now, but about where he was before." She did not say where he was. She did not say Hogwarts was a school of magic, or what Dumbledore had arranged in 1981, or what Lily Potter had done to make the blood protection possible. She did not say anything about the wizarding world, which she was bound by more than statute not to say, bound by 30 years of loyalty to someone she had trusted and was still in the part of her that would always trust him, trusting. She said what she could say. She walked home to Wisteria Walk in the early afternoon, with the particular feeling of someone who has put something down that they have been carrying for a very long time, and who cannot yet determine whether the putting down was the right thing or only the necessary one. She fed her cats. She made herself tea. She sat in the quiet of her kitchen and thought about a boy who had spent 10 years looking at photographs of her cats because she had nothing better to give him. And she held that thought, and she did not write to Dumbledore that evening. There would be time enough for that. It was the second week of June, and the end of term had the quality it always had. Students noisier in the corridors, homework with a reduced urgency, the grounds filling up in the long summer evenings with groups that lingered later than the rules strictly permitted. Harry had been spending his evenings outside as much as possible, in the way of someone who knew he was going somewhere smaller soon and was taking the wide space in while he still could. Hagrid walked him back from the lake on a Wednesday evening. He had something to say. Harry had been aware of this for most of the walk, because Hagrid had a very particular manner when he was managing information. He wasn't sure how to deliver. For the last 10 minutes he had talked in considerable detail about a family of Grindylows apparently settled at the western shore of the lake, and Harry had listened and waited. "So," Hagrid said, as the castle came into sight. Then he didn't continue. "You were going to say something," Harry said. "Ah, yeah." Hagrid looked at the castle, then at Harry, then cleared his enormous throat. "Something you ought to know." Dumbledore said he'd tell ye himself, but I thought ye know how Dumbledore tells ye things. Harry did know. Dumbledore told you things in the way of someone assembling a gift so carefully that by the time you had unwrapped it, you had forgotten what was inside. "Someone came to Privet Drive," Hagrid said. Muggle. "She came with questions about the house, and the school, and your health, and your glasses." He paused. "She spoke to her neighbour." Harry waited. "Mrs. Figg? Wisteria Walk? You know her, the one with the cats," Harry said. "That's her." She told them what she'd seen. Over the years, Hagrid was watching Harry's face with the careful attention of a man who knows he is delivering something large and is watching to see how it lands. It's all in a file somewhere. The woman from Social Services and the Muggle doctor from August. There's a record of all of it. Dumbledore knows. I think he's been meaning to tell you himself. "Do I have to go back?" Harry said. It came out direct. He had been at Hogwarts for 9 months and was only beginning to understand what it meant to ask things directly. And sometimes it came out fast. "Yeah," Hagrid said. "Yeah, do. For now." He shifted his enormous shoulders in the way he did when he was preparing an explanation he already knew would be inadequate. There's a kind of magic. What your mum did when she died, she bound a protection to Petunia's house, and it holds as long as ye can go back there, as long as it's still home. Very old magic. Dumbledore says it has to be maintained. He had had a year to get used to the idea that the magical world had been arranging things around him for a decade. He was beginning to understand that arranging was not the same as having arranged well. "All right," he said. Hagrid looked at him for a moment with an expression Harry could not quite name. "Yeah, more all right than ye should have to be," Hagrid said. It was not exactly what he had intended to say, but it was, as far as Harry could tell, true. Dumbledore called Harry to his office 2 days before the end of term. He was. Harry understood this only because he had been watching Dumbledore since September and had developed some vocabulary for it, not certain how to begin the conversation. For a man who was 110 years old and had done nearly everything at least twice, this uncertainty was noticeable. He told Harry about August, the doctor, the X-rays, the file that had been opened and kept. He told Harry about the follow-up letter, and the health visitor, and the social worker in November, and the case reference number, and the investigation that had discovered that the school Petunia had listed did not appear in any Muggle record in Scotland or anywhere else. He told Harry about Mrs. Figg, that she had been asked to speak to the caseworker, and that she had told them what she had observed over 10 years of watching. Then he paused. He looked at his hands briefly, in the way of someone choosing language with unusual care. "The arrangement at your aunt's house," he said, "was imperfect. I bear responsibility for the ways in which it was imperfect." Harry sat with this. He had not, in 11 years, had many conversations in which an adult told him they bore responsibility for something that had affected him. He did not entirely know what to do with it. He heard the sentence. He also heard the shape of what was not in the sentence, that the imperfection had been visible from the beginning, that Dumbledore had known this and had chosen other things instead, and that he was not saying so. Not fully. Not to an 11-year-old in a June afternoon. "All right," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Something in the blue eyes shifted. "You are permitted," he said, "to find that it is not all right if you do." "I know," Harry said. He thought about it. "I think I'll find that later. There's quite a lot of it." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, with the expression of someone who has been told something accurate by someone they underestimated the accuracy of. Then he stood, thanked Harry for coming, and Harry went downstairs into the corridor, where the end-of-term light lay long and warm across the stone floor. McGonagall found him near the stairs. She gave him his end-of-year report, and she looked at him directly, as she did everything, for a moment before she turned to go. "You are to come and speak to me at the beginning of next term," she said, "about anything you wish." She said it without qualification or performance, and then she went up the stairs, and Harry stood in the corridor with his report and the summer light, and filed what she had said under things that were different. Now the case was assessed. Harry was not removed. Dumbledore had provided assurances through channels that could not be specified without exposing more than the statute permitted. Petunia had signed documents confirming enrollment at a school in Scotland. The social worker was not fully satisfied, and the school was not found in any Muggle directory. But neither absence was sufficient to produce a court order when a responsible adult had vouched for the child's welfare. The case was not closed. The file remained open. It sat in a cabinet in a building in Surrey, and it contained one hospital record, one X-ray showing old-healed changes to the nasal bones of a child aged 10, one health visitor's note, one welfare check report with observations about a room that was too neat, one set of assurances from an authority whose address could not be traced to a building, one unresolved status. Harry Potter had been for 10 years, a name in the wizarding world that people said with a held breath and a particular care. In the Muggle world, he had been no one, the unremarkable child of a street that did not remark on him. Now there was a file that said, "This child was here. Someone looked. We wrote it down. He got on the train on the last day of term." The Hogwarts Express, filled with noise and owls and trunks and students who were glad for summer and students who would have stayed. Harry found a seat and watched the platform disappear and Scotland begin to pass outside the window, wide and green and grey, already giving way south toward England. He was going back to Privet Drive, as he must. The blood protection, the summer return, the arrangement that was imperfect and necessary, and that he was beginning to understand, could be both things at once, without one. He did not know what would happen to the file, whether the social worker would come again, or whether the case reference number would sit in its cabinet for years without touching anything. He did not know yet everything that Dumbledore had not said to him, or what Mrs. Figg had been carrying on Wisteria Walk for 10 years, or what McGonagall had seen since September that she was saving for next term. What he knew was that the file existed, that a doctor had written something down in August and kept it, that Mrs. Figg had sat in front of a woman with a clipboard and said what she had seen, that somewhere in Surrey there was a record that named him and described him and stated in the careful language of institutions. This child was here, and we looked, and we did not look away. His glasses sat clean on his nose. He looked out the window at Scotland becoming England